Hey y'all, my name's Sam and I'm a chemistry tutor here on Wyzant. The question is, chemistry, help me, I am lost now. The question is, solid aluminum Al and chlorine Cl2 gas react to form solid aluminum chloride AlCl3. Suppose you have 13 moles of Al and 2 moles of Cl2 in a reactor. Calculate the largest amount of AlCl3 that could be produced. And then round your answer. All right, so first I'm going to write a balanced reaction to kind of describe the chemical process that's happening here. We have our Al solid, Cl2 gas. It's really important that you remember that Cl is diatomic, which means in nature we find Cl's bound to each other in molecules, and they come together to form this solid. Unfortunately, this doesn't really obey the law of conservation of mass because we have 2 chlorines over here versus 3 here. So we have to rectify that. It's a little bit tricky, but for me, I noticed that if I put a 3 here, I would get 6 chlorines, and I would also get 6 chlorines if I put a 2 here. Unfortunately, when I do that, I also increase the amount of aluminum. Now that means I have 2 here, so I can also fix it by putting 2 here. 2Al, 6Cl, 2Al, 6Cl. Great. The next thing I need to do is figure out how many moles of product I could get from each of these moles of reactant using the stoichiometric ratios or the molar ratios from this reaction. So if I have 13 moles of aluminum, I know that there's 2 moles of AlCl3 for every 2 moles of aluminum. And you'll notice that 2 over 2 is just 1, which means my result is that I could get out 13 moles of AlCl3. Let's do the same thing for, oh, sorry, really I should be putting the correct number of sig figs to be a good role model for you out there. 2 moles of Cl2. And then the molar ratio is a little different on this one. I think it's actually going to be AlCl3 over 3 moles of Cl2. And if you look at it this way, it's going from 2 to 2 times 2/3, which is around 4/3, or we could always make this a decimal if you'd like, of AlCl3. All right, be careful here because the question says calculate the largest amount of AlCl3 that can be produced. So a lot of kids might be like, oh yeah, well 13 is greater than 4/3, which is true, although that's not actually correct because we're actually limited by something called the limiting reagent, which means whichever reagent or reactant gives us the smaller number of moles of product, that's all we can really produce in nature because you can't just generate more products than you had of an input. So a good example that I've heard recently is that if you have 2 bodies of cars and 7 wheels, how many total cars can you produce? And some students might be like, all right, you got 2 bodies. That means that you can build 2 cars around those bodies. But as we know, cars that drive, at least street legal ones, each need to have 4 wheels. So this means you're actually limited by the 7 wheels and you can only get 1 car out. So let me draw a quick arrow and say that this is a really similar limiting reagent kind of situation. All right, so for me, the limiting reagent was the 4/3 moles of AlCl3, but unfortunately that's not really rounded to 0.1 mole. So I believe that when we round, we should get 1.3 repeating, but since we're rounding to 0.1, we just stick with that, AlCl3. And that should be our final answer. All right, thanks so much.